Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daniel Lipson from the National Library of Israel. I'm a reference librarian here at the National Library. What the reference team does is we try to assist all the researchers who come here with their research and explain how to use online catalogs and the databases and the different services that the library has. We each have do other things as well and have our own hobbies and topics of research. And mine, one of the topics that I spent quite some time researching is the Jewish libraries and the Jewish private book collections in Europe that were looted by the Nazis during the Holocaust and before the Holocaust. Many of these books were discovered, and many of them ended up here in the National Library in Jerusalem. This is the library. This is where we are today. The library was established in 1892. It grew and grew and became part of the Hebrew University in 1925. Today, we are no longer part of the Hebrew University, but the library building is still in the campus in Givat Ram, Yerushalayim. But this is what I see from my window at work. In the back, you can see the Knesset, the Israel Parliament, and the skateboard ramp-like building is the new National Library. Most of the books are already there, and we hope to move towards the end of October this year. But today I want to talk about these books that were looted by the Nazis during the Holocaust, and especially one small book, 1930 copy printed in Warsaw of the Mesilat Yesharim, probably the most popular book on Jewish ethics by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto in the 18th century. He was born in Italy and he's buried here in Israel. And this was a very popular book, used today as well. But this is one of the books that was looted during the Holocaust, or not all the books were actually taken. Some were left when the Jews were deported to the camps. But this is one of the books that arrived here in the library. But to understand the story, I want first to give us an introduction and talk a little bit about Jewish life and Jewish libraries in Vienna before and during the Holocaust. So the community in Vienna was run by the Israelitische Kultusgemeinde, the office of the Jewish community, which we will call the IKG. And in 1814, a Viennese printer by the name of Anton Schmidt donated the first books to the IKG's library. He was a printer, a non-Jew, but he printed many Jewish books, and he brought the first 133 volumes, and this is how the library there in Vienna began. And over the years, many more books were donated. The library grew and grew. By 1904, they already had 10,000 books. In 1906, the library moved to the IKG office building. It took up 2 whole floors in the building there. The library was already a very important Jewish library worldwide. And by 1938, they had 34,000 books, 41 incunabula, the first printed books from the 15th century, 645 manuscripts, and many valuable and other rare items in their collection. This is a partial catalogue that they printed in 1914 of a specific collection, an important collection of books that they had in the library at the time. And here we can see an example of one of the books with the stamp of the IKG library in Vienna here on the side. But on 12th of March, 1938, the Nazis march into Vienna, the Anschluss, and life changes there for the Jews forever. They confiscate in July 1938, they confiscate the library, they close it down, and a year later, in 1939, they pack it all up and send the books to Berlin. Now, the Nazis had been stealing books for some time now. The war hasn't even broken out yet. They loot books from all considered enemies of the German people, the Freemasons and Catholics and communists, and of course also from the Jews. And many of these books are collected by what will later be known as the Reich Security main office in Berlin, and it had the seventh department there, which was run by Alfred Six. He established a huge library of some 2 to 3 million books that they had looted over the years during the war. And these books were stored in a Freemason lodge in Berlin, and when that wasn't enough room, they moved to another building. The library grew and grew the whole time throughout the war. But Berlin, like other cities in Germany, were being bombed by the Allies, and they realized that they had to take care of these looted books, which were so important for them for academic research and anti-Semitic scholarship. These books were used, or they were planned to be used after the war. The Germans, of course, thought they were going to win, and then they could sit back and learn all about the Jewish people that they had just destroyed. So in August 1943, many of the Hebrew and Yiddish books are taken out and for self-keeping and moved to the Theresienstadt ghetto, where they were catalogued by Jews there in the ghetto, in Theresienstadt. A few months later, in November 1943, a fire broke out in the library, and about 250,000 books in this looted library went up in flames, among them some important parts of the IKG library that had been looted from Vienna. And later, when Berlin was occupied by the Soviets, they found remaining 350,000 books there. The Russians took 48 crates of books and took them off to Russia, never to be heard of again. They left the gates open, and so people went in and looted whatever they could find. And whatever was left, a few books that were left here in this huge library, were discovered by some American officers, and these officers took the books to Offenbach near Frankfurt. Now, the U.S. military had been collecting looted books in Offenbach for some time. But 1946, they already had a huge building here, five floors of looted books. Many of these books from Jewish libraries and Jewish private collections. They tried to return the books to the countries from where they were stolen as much as this was possible. But there remained some hundreds of thousands of books, and at this point, a Jewish corporation, the Jewish Cultural Reconstruction Corporation, takes over from the U.S. military. This corporation includes various Jewish organizations, among them the Hebrew University and the National Library. We were part of Hebrew University at the time, and after many years and discussions, these books are split up and given to many different Jewish institutions and libraries across the world. The National Library brings some 200,000 books to Israel. We keep what we need, and most of the other books are given to other libraries and other places in the country. And this goes on for another couple of decades. Library representatives go to Europe to find more books and bring them back. And all in all, hundreds of thousands of these books that used to belong to Jewish families, Jewish libraries, were brought to Israel. Similar thing is happening in Austria. Many books are sent because of the bombings from Berlin to Austria, and are discovered by the British Army there. And they too try to restitute these books and give as many of them back to the places from where they were stolen from. But a representative of the Jewish Cultural Reconstruction, this Jewish corporation I mentioned before, he's in Europe, and he discovers his reports of some 300,000 Jewish books which are lying around somewhere in Austria. And everyone realized that we have to find these books and save them and give them back to the Jewish people somewhere across the world, in some libraries, different libraries. And the National Library sent their representative, Shlomo Shunami, who is one of the most important librarians in the National Library, a man with much experience, and he's joined with a representative from the Ministry of Religion here in Israel. And they go to Austria to try and find these books and ask around, meet the authorities and the librarians, and no one is very helpful there. Among others, meet the head of the library, in Vienna of the National Library, a Dr. Alois Issinger, who tells them, I know nothing about looted books, and even if these books were here somewhere, they aren't our property. They're German books. They came from Germany. So he was very unhelpful, and the two returned to Israel a bit disappointed. But Shulami comes back again in 1954. And he hangs around in an archive, looks through papers, and all of a sudden he picks up a document, and his face goes white. And the clerk at the desk says, "Are you okay? Can I bring you a cup of water?" And Shulami says, "Just let me take this document out. I'll just need to make a copy," which he does and brings it back later. Shulami has discovered a smoking gun. This document, which we can see here in German, was written by that same Dr. Alois Issinger, who told them that he knows nothing about these books. But as he was saying this, he was behind the backs, and behind the backs of many other people, was distributing these books across Austria, across Vienna, to various different libraries, some 210,000 of them, most of which, about 150,000, ended up in the library of the University of Vienna. So now the cat was out of the bag, and they had to admit to the lie. Yes, the books are here. And Shulami describes, and I quote, "The head librarian at the National Library of Vienna moved a bookshelf full of books that hid a secret door behind of which was the anticipated treasures. Hundreds of crates, not only in Judaica, but all fields of science, history, philosophy, art, collections of scientific journals, bibliographies, some 250,000 volumes in all." That's what he estimates that he found there, hidden behind some secret doorway. And he also tells a story of, as they're showing him through the library, he manages to bring back 34 Hebrew incunabula, the first printed books, the most rare and valuable books from the library in Vienna. I found them in one corridor in the National Library of Vienna. I took them out of the library with permission, but without the library management knowing exactly what he had taken. And these books are now here at the National Library. Here is one of them. And we can see it in the IKG catalog. This was one of their books. You can see the stamp at the top of the page, written in the catalog. This is the commentary of Ramban, of Nachmanides, to the Torah, printed in 1480, or at least somewhere around 1480. The first page was missing, so you can see it's been filled in by hand. But this is an incunabula, one of the first books ever printed, one of the first Jewish books, definitely, ever printed. So a few years later, Kurt Willmann, who is the manager of the National Library of Israel, goes to Austria. They have meetings and discussions, and at the end, they decide that most of the books from the library in the National Library in Vienna will be given to the community, to the Jewish community in Vienna. There's not much left of the Jewish community after the war, so the Jewish community gives these books as a gift to the National Library of Israel, or at least a large amount of these books. And when they arrive here in Jerusalem, the library prepares a special label saying that these books are a gift from the community, the Jewish community in Vienna, in memory of the victims of the Holocaust, and that these labels are pasted into all of the books that came from Vienna. Similar labels were pasted in other books that came from other countries after the war, and they can be found today in the library's collection. Here are a few examples. You can see on the side that the label, and there's another one, and another one, and that brings us to this book, Mesilat Yesharim, and we can see the label again. This book came from Vienna, from a Jewish community of Vienna. And at the top of the page, you can see a handwritten dedication. Now, when I found this book, during my research into these books that had been looted or went missing during the war, you couldn't read the dedication. There was some kind of white piece of paper stuck on top of it. And I was worried that if I peeled it off, I'll ruin the book and I wouldn't be able to read anything. So I sent it to the library's Restoration and Conservation Laboratory, which we have downstairs, and they very carefully peeled it off. And now we can read what was behind that paper. We can clearly see this Hebrew dedication. It says, and I'll translate roughly, to the nice young man, David Dov, it doesn't have any surname, on occasion of his bar mitzvah. This is a gift from family Shin S. Schonfeld. Vienna, Erev Shabbat Kodesh, this is before Shabbat, Parshat Ki Tisa, of a Sidra of Ki Tisa, which just happens to be my bar mitzvah parsha as well. Tafret Tzadik Vav, that's 1936. So I'm holding this book that belonged to a bar mitzvah boy a few years before the Holocaust, and I wondered what happened to him. His book is in my hands, but what happened to this boy? There were about 200,000 Jews in Austria before the war. Most of them, about 90% of them, lived in Vienna. 1938, in March, when the Nazis come in, they closed down the IKG office in Vienna. There are pogroms and violence and pillage, and people. This comes as a complete shock to the Jews in Austria, in Vienna. Remember, in Germany, this has been going on already for a few years, but in Vienna, it happens overnight. And the Nazis send their expert, Adolf Eichmann, on his first major mission to make Vienna, to make Austria, Judenrein, clean and clear of Jews. But he understands the best way to do this is to reopen the IKG, to reopen the community office, and work together with the administrators there, because at the end of the day, they both have a common interest. They both the Nazis and the leaders of the community want to ensure a rapid and successful immigration of Jews from Austria. And the best way to do that is by working together. Not that the Jews had any option, of course. They had to do what the Nazis told them, but they both wanted to get the Jews out as quickly as possible. And here we see head of a community sitting at his desk, but it's actually Adolf Eichmann sitting at his desk, and he's telling everyone what he wants to be done. Now the Jews realize that this is the time to leave. Everybody wants to leave Austria, and of course it's not so simple. You need the right documentation and passports and visas, and where are you going to go? Other countries don't really want refugees. You need to prove that you need to prove the efficiency of immigrants coming into the trade and to the industry of these other countries, and to prove that it's worthwhile for them to take you in. So the community organizes special courses and retraining for the Jews of the community in Vienna. People want to immigrate to a certain country and they don't have enough farmers. Okay, fine, we'll have an agricultural course. A different country needs electricians or teachers. So we'll teach our community these professions, and that way it'll be much easier for them to leave Austria and find somewhere to go to the destination that they want to. Of course, there's other problems as well. Everybody wants to go to America, but America has a quota of 26,000 citizens, Austrian and German, not only Jews, and not everybody would be affected, of course. But this training and the IKG put into this, with a lot of help from money coming in from the US, eventually they managed to save about 136,000 Jews who managed to immigrate in time. But to immigrate, the first stage would be to fill in a special questionnaire, which was waiting at the desk on the ground floor of the Israel Community Office in Vienna. And here are some examples of these questionnaires that the family or the head of the family would have to fill in. Details about the family and how many people and your profession. And then these documents would be processed. It could take some time until they'd be able to get the final permission to leave Austria to the country that they would like to go to. Now, the archive of the community the Jewish community in Vienna survived the war, and after the war was sent to the Central Archives of the History of the Jewish People in Jerusalem. The Central Archives is now part of the National Library. They have their own staff, and it's like a separate institution, but they're part of our collection. And And all of these documents are here and can actually be searched online with the National Library's online catalog. And we can search for people who lived in Vienna before the war and find out a lot of information about them thanks to these questionnaires that survived. 1941 is the year when everything starts to change. There's already been thousands of Jews have already been sent to Dachau. Some of them actually were returned thanks to the IKG and their work together with the Nazis. But in 1941, the mass deportations begin, and the Jews have to start wearing the yellow star on their clothes. And the next year, more and more Jews, those who didn't leave on time, were all sent towards the Eastern Europe, where most of them were murdered during the Holocaust. And in the year 2000, this Holocaust memorial was erected in Judenplatz in Vienna in memory of those 65,000 Jews who didn't manage to get out in time and were killed and were murdered by the Nazis. So what happened to our bar mitzvah boy, David Dov? So I started with the central database of Shoah victim names in Yad Vashem, the Israel Holocaust Museum. Yad Vashem have been collecting names of Holocaust victims since the 1950s, mainly at the beginning at least, with help of testimony pages that people would still today can fill in about friends and relatives who were killed during the Holocaust. And to date, they have close to 5 million names, which is a lot. Nobody knows if we'll ever know all the names of Jews killed during the Holocaust, but 5 million names is quite a lot. So I put in David Dov. I know he's from Vienna. I don't have a surname. Surname wasn't in the book, wasn't in the dedication. And we get 2 results. And I immediately know it's a second result because the date of birth, the year he was born in, 1923, it works out very well with our 1936 bar mitzvah. So he was born in 1923, 13 years beforehand. Now, thanks to this database, I also have a surname, family Neuwirth. And now that it's this is a testimony page that Yad Vashem have. Yes, we can see in Hebrew, family Neuwirth. We have the name of the father and the name of the mother, and the address in Vienna. It says here that he was deported with his family and disappeared, whatever that means. There's a date in 1944, 1945 with a question mark, not very clear. And one of the most important things in these testimony pages is who filled it in, who gave in this information. So at the bottom it says here, David Rafael Ben Ami, and I recognized the name. He was an Israeli singer. I thought of contacting him, but when I looked him up, it turned out that he passed away a few years earlier, and that was the end of that. But now I had a family name, Neuwirth, and I could look them up in the National Library's catalog to see if there was a questionnaire. And there was. We can see here Samuel Neuwirth, this is the father, filling in the questionnaire for his family. And it says he's a rabbiner, he's a rabbi, and where he studied, and what languages he can speak, Hebrew and Hungarian and German, obviously. On the second page, it says where he wants to immigrate to. He wants to go to Cleveland, Ohio. Why to Cleveland? Because he has a friend there called Weiss, who has offered him a job and he can support himself. And this is, of course, very important. And at the bottom here, we have the names of his family, his wife, Irma, and a daughter called Ilsa, and a son called David Bernard. That's the boy we're looking for. David Dov is a bear in Hebrew. Bear would be Bernard in German. So David Dov, or David Bernard, this is the boy that we're looking for. We have his date of birth. And then there's another 2 sisters, Marianne and Liselotte. So we found the questionnaire that this family gave in. They wanted to leave. They wanted to go to Cleveland, to the USA. But then we look up, there's another database called Austrian Victims of the Holocaust, and they have information about those 64, 65 1,000 Jews who were killed from Austria who were killed. And I look up Neuwirth, and it's a number of Neuwirths in Austria, but we can find the family we're looking for by the address. They all live in the same at the same address, and we can see this. The sisters, the list is much longer, of course. And here we have David Bernard Neuwirth, and this database also gives us more information that he was killed in 1942 in Mali Trostonets, which is near Minsk. They were deported, and 4 days later they were killed. And this is the deportation list that this collection shows us. We can see the 14th of September 1942, and here along the side we see the Neuwirths who were sent to Mali Trostonets, which was a large estate just south of Minsk. But now I went back to Yad Vashem, to the database, and I started again. I have a surname, and we know he's David. Let's leave it be confusing. Vienna, and I have a number of results. So we already saw one of them. One of them was that testimony page that I showed you before. I find another testimony page. It doesn't add very much more information to what we saw before. And there's another page, this time it's from Yad Vashem. They also collected information from other places. And here we can see, and they made a whole page about this, that Davidov and his family were on transport to Vienna to Mali Trostonets. And we have a date and a lot of information about this train and 1,000 Jews who were on it and the stops along the way, and there's even a map. And this gives us more information about the last days of the Neuwirth family. But there was one more testimony page. This one was written in English. Again, we have the same information, Neuwirth David Bernard. This time we have a picture as well, the name of the father and the mother. Deported to Minsk, which is close enough. But the interesting thing about this page was the person who sent it in, Ilse Deutsch. And she was the sister. So I went back to our deportation list, and she's not on the list. We see David, and we see his 2 sisters and 2 parents, but Ilse wasn't there. Ilse, the oldest sister, got away before the war. And she has pictures of her family. And she sends these pictures and testimony pages into Yad Vashem. And then I looked up Ilse. Ilse has her own questionnaire. She was old enough to leave by herself. She left before the family. The family never made it. And she writes that her profession, she works in the fashion industry, and she knows German and French and English and other language, and etc., etc. She wants to go to Argentina or the USA or to England. And that's where she goes. She goes to England. She goes and settles down in London. She marries someone by the name of Deutsch, and now she is Ilse Deutsch from London. And another important thing on her testimony page is her address. Alba Court, Alba Gardens, London, in Golders Green. Now that's where I grew up. So I immediately asked my parents, "Do you recognize the name? Do you know any Ilse Deutsch from Golders Green? This is 5 minutes away from where we used to live." But they didn't recognize the name. So I carried on searching. And I tried Jenny, one of the genealogy websites, and I find her on Jenny. But unfortunately, I also find a gravestone. And she passed away 5 years ago. And we just missed her. She would have been very pleased to know about her brother's book, which we have here in the National Library. On the gravestone, it mentions her family, her parents, her sisters, and her brother. You can see in the red box, Achia Davidov, who is mentioned on her gravestone because they don't have gravestones, the rest of the family. But Jenny gives us some more information. She has a family of her own. She's a mother, and she's a mother of Private, the names aren't here, and Renee and David. And I realized that perhaps we can still make contact with the family. So I still have a lot of family in Golders Green and Hendon. I sent out, I write to my cousins, send out to WhatsApp. Does anybody know the family of Ilse Deutsch, or children, grandchildren? And the next day I start getting back replies from my cousins. Yes, I go to the same shul as the grands. Yes, my parents live next door to the daughter, and within a day, I have some contacts in the Deutsch family. And the best contact, by the end of the day, I made contact with Devora. Now, Devora was the granddaughter of Ilse Deutsch. And she knew a lot about her grandmother, a lot about the story of the family that was left behind in Vienna. And I'm talking to Devora on the phone, and it turns out that Devora lives 5 minutes away from me in Ramat Bet Shemesh, which is just another coincidence. So I take the book home, and we meet at home, and I show her the book, and she shows me some pictures, and we talk about the family. And Devora explains that yes, her grandmother managed to get out. She traveled with an aunt, but the rest of the family remained because David Dov had polio, and with polio, no country was was willing to accept someone with polio, so they had to remain. And the father, Ilse's father, was a rabbi, was a community rabbi, and he didn't want to leave his community, so they stayed. They stayed enough year, and in the end, they ended up deported to Vedef in but the next door neighbor of the Neuvild's next door neighbor saved some of her possessions, including those pictures which we saw before, and Ilse made copies and gave copies to Yad Vashem, and that's how we know what David Dov looked like. Another thing that remained was this Kiddush cup, which was another bar mitzvah gift that David Dov received. I met Dvora's brother this year in February. I came to London to speak at the Jewish Book Week, and he came as well, which was very nice. And he brought this Kiddush cup, so I took a quick picture of it. This too belonged to David Dov, and this is what remains of the family. A few weeks after meeting Dvora and talking about and hearing this story, I was on a short day trip with my family in the Gilboa Range Mountains in northern Israel. We took a break, and all of a sudden, my phone rings, and I pick up the phone, and this is Debbie speaking, Debbie from Yad Vashem. I heard about the book that you found in the library's collection, and I think, well, this is a bit strange because I didn't tell Yad Vashem. I told a few people at work, and obviously I spoke to Dvora, and the Deutsch family know about this. But how does the Israel Holocaust Museum, where did they hear about this story? I mean, it's good of them to know about it, but I didn't tell anyone. So I'm speaking to Debbie, and it turns out that Debbie is the granddaughter of Rabbi Schonfeld, the rabbi who wrote the dedication inside the Mesilat Yesharim book that we saw before, which was really quite amazing. And it took a while to understand how Debbie had actually heard about this. So it turns out that when I was talking to the Deutsch family and to Dvora, and I told them about this book, Dvora told her cousin, she has a cousin in the United States, and this cousin teaches in a school, she teaches the great-granddaughter of that Rabbi Schonfeld. And that's where the connection was. She spoke to her mother and said, my cousin from England has found a book that was written by Rabbi Schonfeld, a dedication from Rabbi Schonfeld, your grandfather. And this is how Debbie hears about it, which was really quite amazing. I put the phone down, and a minute later, it rings again. My aunt from Israel. And she says, I hear you've been talking with my good friend Debbie. I said, well, how do you know about this story? Debbie is her next door neighbor. So everybody seems to know everyone. So here we see in the red box, Shin Schonfeld. This is Rabbi Shabtai Schonfeld in Vienna. giving this book as a gift to David Dov in 1936. And here is a picture of Rabbi Schonfeld here on the right-hand side. He is a secretary of Agudas Israel Orthodox movement in Vienna, which was I got quite surprised a few weeks later when I came across another book which didn't have the label from Vienna, but I did have some suspicions about this book. I felt it that it was also one of his looted books, or at least a book that was left in Vienna when the Jews were deported. And you can see on the side here the stamp Agudas Israel Vienna. So this was just a chumash, a regular chumash, which must have been in the office of the Agudas Israel in Vienna, and possibly since Rabbi Schonfeld was a secretary, it may have been in his room. He may have actually used this book, and we see him twice in one story. But this book not only didn't have the label that I expected, it had a different label on the other side, something which wasn't very clear. So I sent the book back again to our restoration lab, and they peeled off the page and discovered behind it that label that we'd mentioned before. Yes, this book was from Vienna. It was looted, it was found, and it was sent to the National Library some 60 years ago or more. And now we know for sure that this was one of the books. And they also they cleared off the sticker on the other side of the binding. And now we can see where this book came from. This was in the collection in the Library of Oriental Studies Library in the University of Vienna. Now, how did this book arrive at the University of Vienna from the offices of the of Agudas Israel in Vienna? So, so during the war, there was an Austrian student called Schubert, and he had asthma, so he couldn't serve in the army during the war. He was a fire warden. He'd look out for fires or for dangerous places that could catch fire. And he comes across in the basement of the community of the Jewish synagogue in Austria. He comes across some 20,000 books which had been hidden there in the basement. And he wants to take them out. He understands they're in bad condition. Some of them are moldy. He wants to take them out. Now, he has a professor in university, Victor Christian, who is an anti-Semitic scholar, but he's also a book collector. So Kurt Schubert says to his professor, why don't we take these books out and save them and put them in our library at the university? So the Professor Christian is very pleased to have some looted Jewish books. They move them to the library, stick this label on because now they're university property. And after the war, Kurt Schubert gives them back to the community, to the Jewish community. And as we saw before, the Jewish community sends these books, or many of these books, to the National Library in Jerusalem. So Rabbi Schonfeld, the secretary, leaves Austria. He leaves Vienna straight after the Anschluss. He doesn't even fill in a questionnaire. He doesn't wait for that long. He takes his family and they move to England, where he carries on his work in the Agudas Israel movement, and he even publishes a number of books. One of them, the blue one you can see on the right-hand side, is published in London. It says at the bottom the name of the publisher, Grodetsky, and the address of this publishing house, 129, 131 Cavell Street in East London. This is where he printed his books, and then from there he moves to New York, where the family settled down, and his son is Rabbi Fabian Schonfeld, who I hadn't heard about, but friends from New York said, yes, of course, he's a famous rabbi in New York. He just passed away in 2020. So Rabbi Fabian Schonfeld was born in 1923. He was born in the same year as David Dov, and they were friends. They were both friends from Vienna. David Dov remained, and he managed to make it out in time. So to clear this up a little bit, we have Rabbi Shabtai Schonfeld in Vienna, He's friends with Rabbi Simcha Shmuel Neuwirth in Vienna. He has a son who becomes Rabbi Fabian Schonfeld in New York. Rabbi Fabian Schonfeld used to be the friend of David Dov Neuwirth when they were living together till 1938 in Vienna. So the Schonfelds moved to the United States. David Dov and his family are murdered, but Ilse Deutsch, the sister, moves to London. And Ilse has a large family, and she, among her children and grandchildren, she has a granddaughter who gets married and moves to live in New York. And they have a son. And at the son's bris in New York, Rabbi Fabian Schonfeld is the sandak, the godfather. And he's holding this baby boy in his hands, and someone says, do you know that this baby that you're holding is the great-grandson of a sister of your good friend, David Dov, who was murdered many, many years ago? And of course, he's very surprised, and everyone's emotional and very happy to close the circle. Rabbi Fabian Schonfeld has a large family of his own, and I wrote up this story about this book for the library's blog. I wrote a short article about it, and normally what happens is I'd send the article in. Again, this isn't my job. I'm a reference librarian, but from time to time I like writing about interesting things I come across. I sent it into our content management team. Normally they check, they make some corrections, send it back to me to check. But this time they uploaded it, went online immediately, and I didn't even know about this. And on the way out that evening, I meet a friend of mine from the cataloging department, and he says, "Oh, I just read your article," which of course surprised me because I didn't know it was online. And then he says, "Well, you know Rosalind Duke. Rosalind Duke used to be the National Library's manager some years back. Rosalind Duke is the mother-in-law of Rabbi Schonfeld's granddaughter. So all of a sudden we have another connection in the National Library, not only the book, but also there's some family involved as well." A few days later, I went over my notes again, and I went back to Jenny, the genealogy website, to look again at the pictures of that gravestone. And then I noticed something which I'd forgotten the first time. Jenny tells the connection between you, the person whose account it is, and the person who's being researched. And it turns out that David Bernard Neuwirth is my first cousin, once removed's wife's second cousin, twice removed, which makes us family, which I thought was very fitting to end the story. So in the library's catalog, I added a note. Every book has a record, so I added a note saying that the book has a dedication to David Dov for his bar mitzvah, and this can be seen in the library's online catalog. Like many other books, we have just finished a project. We've been trying to find these books that had been looted by the Nazis and are now in our collection. So we hope to add notes to some of them when relevant. So this book has a note now saying that it has this dedication to David Dov. And this is where David Dov is today, David Dov and his family, in the fields of Mali Trostonietz. The Nazis exhumed the bodies and burned them all to try and hide the crime, which, of course, we know they couldn't do. The family was murdered. Nothing was left of David Dov. All that's really left of him and his family is this Mesilat Yesharim book, which now is here in the National Library. And this book is, I see it as matzeva, as a gravestone. This is David Dov's gravestone. And here in the National Library of Israel's collection, the book reminds us of his life and the life of his family and the life of his community in Vienna. All those who were tragically killed, the community was destroyed during the Holocaust. So thank you very much.